Hi, everybody. Welcome back here for another exciting topic. Before we get started, I do want to ask you guys if you want to join us by subscribing or pressing the bell so you know when these new videos come out. About 95% of you are not subscribed, and it really helps us understand what the best videos are and ensuring that everybody is seeing this exciting educational content. And today's video is all about your gut and aging. And if it isn't coming for you, it will eventually. It's kind of an inevitable feature of our life, and impacts a lot of what's going on in our body and all the different systems and organs. And what we think might be at the center of a lot of this is the gut microbiome. Shock to nobody. That does tend to be what we end up talking about here. But we want to take you through kind of how the gut changes, but as well, what can you do kind of to impact the effects of aging on your gut. And so the best place to start, I think, is to understand that our gut microbiome undergoes its most extensive changes kind of at the extremes of our life cycle. So in infancy, we see a lot of changes kind of building, impacting neurodevelopment and going into kind of adult-like state. And then in old age, the gut microbiome kind of starts to unravel, might be the best way to talk about it, because composition and diversity grows in infancy, and both of those things decrease in aging. And so we know that aging impacts kind of everything physiologically, genomically, metabolically. Your immune system is impacted in aging. And a healthy gut microbiome kind of sits in the middle of all of this. And we know that it's been identified to help kind of impact all of these systems and kind of help with the overall well-being of older adults. And so the composition and diversity of the gut microbiome changes so much so that in old age, your gut is significantly different than those of a younger age. Now, I can't tell you that at this age, you got an old gut. We don't really know a specific time point where we go from kind of a young or adult-like gut into kind of an older or an elderly gut. But we do know that this happens over time and kind of the composition and diversity slowly decline into an older state. But there's not one definitive date where you kind of go from one to the other. This happens over time.
I would assume that you could have an older, like on paper, right? Like through microbiome testing, that you could have an older appearing gut that doesn't match your actual physiologic age. So I'm assuming, depending on, factors that would impact gut health and microbiome diversity, for example, if someone had an overuse of antibiotics their whole life, it could in theory present as a gut that is older than the one that would match the physiologic age. So I don't know if any research has been done on that specifically, but I would assume that the clock on the microbiome age can be sped up through diet and lifestyle and all the other factors.
And the plus is it could possibly be slowed down with those same factors. And so something we, I think, as a society are appreciating now is more of a functional medicine approach or integrative medicine. And with that comes, I think, our better understanding of how lifestyle impacts health. And so in the last 10 years, the idea that gut health could impact aging has become kind of more widespread or highly talked about. But it's a concept that's been around for hundreds of years, but we're just kind of all jumping on the bandwagon now. So there have been some studies that kind of looked at factors that define an aged gut or things that present more like a degrading gut microbiome. One of them is the diversity and the composition of the gut microbiome changing. And this is also seen in chronic conditions or in gut dysbiosis. So I guess that kind of goes together with your comment, Jason, that like maybe our guts could look older. And there are a number of tests now that look at like what your actual age is and like what your health age is or your presenting age. And I think maybe the gut is an area where that could kind of come in. And so with the composition changes, specific bacteria are changing. And a lot of them have to do with how well we're processing food and nutrients, and creating, enzymes or the building blocks for things like neurotransmitters, vitamins, those kind of things. So these bacteria that are associated with these changes are showing to decrease. So not only is the composition and diversity changing, what's there and what's capable of the gut to do effectively is also changing with these different bacterial populations changing.
Right. And I think a big part of that change in diversity in the bacterial types is a transition to a more pro-inflammatory state. Right. I mean, pretty much you name the chronic disease, and aging could be seen as a chronic disease, right? Like as you age chronically, you're getting more and more ill in most contexts. And any chronic disease has at its foundation, at its core, an inflammatory component to it. Now, there's a lot of factors that can affect inflammation in the body naturally, but there's metabolites of the gut microbiome, such as butyrate and other things that are anti-inflammatory. And so, if the balance of the gut microbiome is off, that could naturally cause an increased inflammatory state and speed up the rate of aging. And the effects of inflammation on all the different body systems, including the gut, which, the more inflammation you have in your gut, the more inflammation you have in the rest of your body. And naturally, if you have inflammation in your gut, it causes more degradation and a negative impact on the health and well-being of the bugs and the microbiome that is existing there. So I would imagine it's a bit of a two-edged sword in that context as well.
Yeah. And that's something that's reported kind of highly, is that these pro-inflammatory bacteria are increasing in abundance. Enterobacteria, Chlorioides are higher, but we also have things that are pro-inflammatory mediators, or ones that mediate dysbiosis. So they're going to help kind of keep this cycle of inflammation and dysbiosis going. And so when you have an increased abundance of these, along with a decreased abundance in beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, these two. So you're going down in things you want, up in things you don't want. And this is creating this kind of cycle of continuous inflammation and dysbiosis within the gut, which leads to other systems to kind of fall to the wayside because they're not being fed correctly. They're not getting the building blocks they need to work effectively.
And that's a really interesting concept as well, the feeding part, right? One of the things I noted in some of the publications was just that as you age, typically the amount, for example, of fiber in a person's diet declines. The amount of complex carbohydrates increases, and so we know very positively that those two things combined, right, not enough fiber and then too much carbohydrates, will in and of itself cause a dysbiosis or an imbalance within the gut. And it appears, based on like population studies, that that's generally the trend for elderly people. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that could be, right? Like for some people, it might be, they lack the ability to chew, or their palate, just that they don't have the same palate that they used to. And so, or they don't, have the interest in preparing foods, and, or they're in a living situation that doesn't allow them to get that diversity as they might otherwise have. And so I think it's a really interesting component. And again, we're talking about aging, but we can age our own guts, whether you're, 5 years old, 15, 50, or, 80, right? It's all about being able to control the environment. And a big part of that is the diet that we're eating. But in the concept of elderly people, or people who are aging, which we all technically are, right? I mean, at some point, I don't know what the age is, as you pointed out, but probably it's younger than we think it is. We begin to slowly decline and decline until there's no more declining left to do. But yeah, I think that the role of the diet here plays a big role in that inflammatory cascade as well.
Yeah. And when we're looking at aging in terms of what's happening externally, these environmental factors, we know that there's a huge alteration in lifestyle as you age. Your diet's going to change. How much medication you're using most likely changes. Your immune system is altered. You're doing less exercise. becoming kind of like you're not moving as much, you're not taking as good care of yourself. It's not a focus point. That these things may be connected to these increase in other chronic conditions, immune dysfunction, generally being less well, but also neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. There's many other diseases that are often categorized that, as aging diseases because they're only going to happen as you get older. Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, to name a few. All of these things are tied together, but even things like arthritis, all of these are tied to immune function. And so gut dysfunction, we know impacts immune function, but some of these building blocks are being taken down based on lifestyle and environmental choices. So being aware of maintaining gut health and its importance in kind of overall well-being and life function in older adults is this kind of paramount ability to modulate aging by kind of evaluating lifestyle choices and what kind of impact that can have on immune function, which seems to be one of the bigger kind of dominoes in leading to many other issues. So if you're looking at your life as you age, and this is completely unrelated to the gut, but kind of something that shift my concept in terms of aging is kind of your brain stops developing somewhere between 21 and 25, which is much older than I think a lot of people appreciate. But you're kind of the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is decisions and inhibitions and ability to make less dumb choices, kind of stops developing around 21 to 25. So that's when you become like fully an adult. From 25 on, your brain starts to age. So you have like a very small window of like peak performance. But that's your aging starts before you're even 30 in terms of your brain and how much it's able to repair itself and kind of bounce back. So I think we need to think about what aging is and when that starts much earlier. And it's so much easier to make lifestyle choices when you have more energy and you're younger, and a little bit more ability to be flexible. As you get older, it does get more difficult to become flexible because you're more set kind of in your ways. And so if we think about aging earlier, what are the things you can do that have the biggest impacts to kind of protect or reverse some of those aging changes? And I feel like we could make a clip of us saying diet across pretty much every video we talk about, but because it's so huge and its ability to make changes quickly makes it so much more important and valuable because you can start reducing some of those negative effects 24 to 48 hours after you start to increase, diversify your diet. And of course, the other is exercise, which we talk about a lot as well, but also you hear it across the board from people that are looking at, lung function, muscle function, bone function. We'll talk about it from the gut. People in neuroscience and neurology are going to talk from the brain perspective because exercise really does impact every system. Similarly, diet has the same impact. So if you're going to make lifestyle changes, go for the hammer. What's going to hit everything and make the biggest impacts? And you talked about this, Jason, about in aging, diet consistently is found to change. And so what do you think brings that about? And why do you think diet, I guess, would be the best place to start if you're able to build that diet?
Ooh, why does it happen? I mean, I don't think it's an aging issue. I think it's an issue of the good food just tastes so good. And the good food is generally, for most people, a junk food. And so I think that's a big part of it is just the, the system more broadly is promoting foods that are unhealthy, that are fattening, that are high in sugar. And there's nothing better than a combination of sugar, fat, and salt. And that happens to be in every single junk food. And our genetics we're just programmed to be more acclimated to those foods. And so it takes a lot more control to avoid those things. And we've talked previously about how a negative shift in your microbiome will actually cause you to be more inclined to eat those foods. You're like more driven to eat those foods because you're trying to feed the bacteria. and the fungus that have overgrown. And those bacteria and fungus are very likely feeding messages to your brain telling you to just consume more of those same foods. So I think, the modern lifestyle as we once know it, I mean, we keep talking about exercise, but it wasn't all that long ago that the majority of people that lived had to have a fairly demanding physical activity level just to survive. I mean, whether it's finding food, a couple hundred years ago or even 50 years ago, when there would have been a lot more manual stuff just to get through day to day. I mean, everything from washing your clothes to commuting to wherever you needed to go. Now the modern lifestyle has most of us sitting in offices, working from behind computers. A lot of people are even working from home. A lot of jobs have been overtaken by automation, and just modern conveniences don't require us to be nearly as physically active as we once did. But our genetics haven't changed a lot, right? In all these thousands of years that we've been developing as humans and evolving as humans, our genetics are still very much the same, but we now are accustomed to a lifestyle that is very, very different than what our genetics originally built off of and how we would best function. And so I think it's, partly the modern convenience, partly, the food industry that really pushes and drives these food choices that make good money and make people feel good for a very short amount of time, if at all. We talk about the dopamine hits and other things. But I think generally speaking, and I'm always harping on this, but the choices that you can make are to try to cut out some of these things that are not good for you. But I really, don't even focus on that as much, because, as soon as people hear, cut something out, they often just tune it out. And from a perspective of having treated a lot of patients trying to navigate this same complex issue, it was really about, look, let's see what we can add in. And, from a statistic standpoint, the average American is eating between 10 to 15 different foods at all. And that's just not enough. And again, over time, the amount of diversity in our diet has declined significantly. And so, what are the things that we can do today? It would be, let's, instead of looking to just cut things out, although that could very well be helpful, it's what can we add in, right? How can we incorporate a more diverse diet? What types of foods? If I'm eating 10 to 15 in a given time, what would it take to go from 15 to 20 or 20 to 30 or 30 to 40? And so just thinking about your plate, like what could you add to your plate to add more diversity to it? What could you do to increase fiber in your diet, right? Of course, there's supplements and there's all the other things, but ultimately fibers in fruits and veggies and so nuts and seeds and meats and all these things. So just looking at your plate day to day, what could you do, commit to this week to go from what you've currently been eating? Maybe for breakfast, you're always eating the same thing, or lunch is just always a sandwich, right? Like what could you do to add a few more foods to your plate each week to increase the diversity of your diet? And we know once you increase the diversity of your diet, when you add more fibers, you begin to feed these food, the bacteria within your gut that will grow these healthier communities that will support the anti-inflammatory compounds like butyrate, as we mentioned earlier, that help to reduce inflammation. And as you reduce inflammation, I mean, that's ultimately the hack of longevity, is reducing inflammation. Like, how do you slow your biological aging? Reduce and slow inflammation. And that is the foundation of anything that relates to anti-aging, to longevity, to reducing or slowing the development of chronic diseases. It all comes down to inflammation. And so by removing foods that are pro-inflammatory, high fructose corn syrup, sugar-based foods, high carbohydrate diets, those are the types of things that feed inflammation. So we reduce inflammation by removing some of those things. We increase the anti-inflammatory compounds that are produced by the microbiome by giving, a diverse diet that includes a lot of fiber. And then sleep, exercise, all of these things, again, help to reduce inflammation. So if you could just think about your body as like a home, and inflammation is like a fire. And it's in chronic diseasing, metabolic diseases, it's just an ongoing, constant, low-grade fire that's happening all the time. And you got to be thinking about it, right? Like, how do I put less kindling into this fire? How do I reduce the oxygen that's feeding this fire? Well, it's through these things, right? It's through getting proper sleep. It's through exercising. And again, you can use these different tracking mechanisms, whether it's an Aura ring or a Whoop or anything, or just your phone to track, your physical activity, right? What are the step counts that I'm at? And instead of aspiring to a six pack, which, is great and all, what could you do this week or this month to commit to going from, I don't know, maybe you're at 1,000 steps a day to go to 2,000, or maybe you're at 3,000, and how do you go to 8,000, right? Like picking smaller goals and working towards, and meanwhile thinking, okay, this is going to help reduce this low grade inflammation that I'm constantly being exposed to. And that will ultimately help me feel better. Today, we know there's mental emotional impacts of just moving more, right? And I think it compounds. So the more that you do these little things, they begin to compound, and over time you'll see and feel the benefits of them. And ultimately you're pushing the aging clock, if you will, down the road. Like, we're all eventually going to decline. There's really no way of avoiding that. But how do we slow the decline? And I think there's a big push in medicine. It's really moved away from like, how do we just live forever? Right? Even though some people are still focused on trying to hack that, to how do we live with the highest quality of life? How do we live better for the time that we do have? Like, what would you prefer, right? Would you prefer to live to 80, but have the last 15 years be really rough, and you're just constantly getting sick, and your mental, emotional health is declining, your memory is declining, your strength is declining? Or would you rather live to, even 75, but those last 10 or 15 years, you're really active and you're doing really well? And the reality is if you're taking these steps, you're definitely going to blow past 75, barring some, unforeseen, accident or something. And so I think that's really the shift that we need to make, is like, not everything needs to change all at once. What can you commit to today to make, some of these variables improve, so you reduce inflammation and feed these resources that are in our body that are trying to support us to prevent the decline. And that's the really, I think, empowering thing here. It's like, we know that the body has the mechanisms and the innate knowledge to prevent and try to slow down these natural things. And so the more that we can support it to do what it knows how to do, based on thousands of years of evolution, like, we've gotten this far for a very good reason. And that reason is we're just inclined to survive. We have the mechanisms of survival, but we need to also stress some of those mechanisms and stress the body to not just, lay in bed, right? Like, if you just were to lay in bed the rest of your life, you're going to be dying much, much sooner, because we need to stress the body. We need to stress the systems that help us stay alive and stay vibrant. So I'll jump off of my pulpit for now, but yeah, this is something
point about this idea of lying in bed. Like, a sedentary lifestyle is not associated with health. And we know that from so many ways, from kind of extremes to office lifestyle, right? Sitting all day does not beget healthiness. And we know that in the elderly, because we're focusing there, but this is kind of a rule that applies everywhere. But in the elderly population that maintains physical lifestyle. Now, one of the studies I'm talking about is they were looking at, and this is such a European thing, but it's an elderly group that did orienteering. So they weren't climbing stairs, they weren't running. They were literally going out as a group and doing orienteering, going for a walk, light hikes. Their lifestyle, their gut microbiome composition was significantly better. They had lower signs of inflammation. They had lower levels of depression and anxiety compared to people that lived in the same community who participated in a sedentary lifestyle. So in terms of exercise, I think people hear exercise, and I am somewhat guilty of this. When I hear exercise, I think like hardcore, going at the gym, going for 5K runs. Like, that is not everybody's cup of tea. It is not my cup of tea. I don't run. It's just not meant for me. But the idea here is adding some level of exercise. And with that, you will build your resistance, your ability, your endurance with the exercise. And so when we think about the beginning of someone's exercise journey or their day-to-day exercise, parking 5 parking spots away, always taking the stairs instead of the elevator, instead of going to the washroom in your building that's the closest to your desk, go to the one the farthest from your desk. You're not doing anything extreme, but by that, you're increasing how many steps you take. If you take the stairs every day, all of a sudden you're not winded at the top of the stairs. That's your body getting healthier, right? That's the first step. With that, some people find if they add exercise in, the foods they crave or what they desire to eat changes because you're burning energy different. In the other people, it's the opposite. You start eating healthier and your body gives you a little bit more energy that you can use for exercise. So some of this is all about building. Some people find that adding exercise in helps with their sleep. So all of these systems are connected. And so by making one change, you can cascade into other changes. And understanding that, I read this the other day and I'm still like processing my shock level of it. But for a lot of people, like Americans, and that's a population you see in a lot of studies because there's a lot of people. But the most fiber they're getting from their diet is from coffee. And instant coffee has significantly more fiber. And so but that's where the state of fast flash food has gotten to, that people just aren't consuming fiber to the level they want. If your cup of coffee is your highlight for your fiber, you need to add fiber to your diet. And we know that fiber is such a huge building block, but this comes in terms of understanding that, appreciating what food you put in and understanding what all of those things do plays a big role. But changing one thing can lead to multiple things. And so, we talk about diet and physical activity is really important. We know sleep is important, and it's how it's tied into chronic conditions. But all of these things have huge negative impacts in aging. So in a vulnerable system that's already on the decline, and we know that's kind of naturally happening, by also not being aware of diet or exercise or the importance of sleep, you're helping that deterioration along versus doing things every day that kind of go against that to kind of prolong the period that decrease happens over. And so and we see these things in terms of people who live to 100. Their gut microbiomes look different. They have different bacterias, and the types of foods they eat and the types of physical activity they had is significantly different. So we know that these factors play a big role. And I guess quickly, before I try to keep these videos under 30 minutes, it's a struggle sometimes, but when the gut becomes extremely dysfunctional, or how do we restore it? So we're entering kind of the concept of like what could be, not what is. And some of this is looking at, it's still in kind of the early scientific phases or preclinical, in early research, looking still in animal models. But the idea that restoring the gut microbiome could slow down aging is something that's kind of just starting to get looked at. But what we're seeing is in these early preclinical studies, basically what we're finding is using a young gut microbiome. So this would be from kind of that early adulthood period in these animal models, and putting that gut microbiome using FMT or fecal microbiota transplantation. If you don't know what that is, watch any of the other videos. But the idea here is taking the gut microbiome and putting it into someone with dysbiosis or dysfunctional gut. So in these studies, what they did is take this young, healthy gut microbiome, put it into an aged animal, and the changes were kind of extreme. So we see reduced inflammation, which we've talked about extensively already, recolonization of the gut, delaying characteristics that are associated with aging, as well as increasing the lifespan of the animal. And so what we're starting to see is, could FMT, or in general, the gut microbiome, be one of the key factors in helping to reduce age-related symptoms, changes, and overall health in aging? Is the gut microbiome kind of the thing that we've been missing as kind of the key piece to the beginning kind of the dominoes of what aging looks like? And we see the implications of changing the gut microbiome or restoring the gut microbiome in a lot of age-related diseases where the gut microbiome declines, is associated with chronic conditions. And by restoring it in these early research studies, we see impacts of overall improved health and improved cognition and reduction in frailty, which are some of kind of the key features of what we define as being aged. So I think kind of the round going all the way back to the beginning is understanding why the gut plays a role both in early life and in late life. And so in terms of what we've covered today is that, inflammation, changes in lifestyle impacted the gut, which then can lead to dysfunction.
What a full circle. And sure enough, FMT can help you to rebuild your microbiome. And, some people say might help you uncover the fountain of life, the fountain of youth. So that remains to be seen yet in longer term studies, but I definitely think we're onto something there. I think the microbiome is more and more proven to have a significant impact on, both the quality and length of life that an individual might have, also in preventing chronic disease. I mean, that's ultimately what allows you to live longer, right? Is not getting a chronic disease like cancer or heart disease, which both are pro-inflammatory conditions. And so that's the goal here. Let's stave off illness. Let's stave off inflammation, and let's ultimately stave off chronic disease. Which the longer you can delay that, the longer you can live.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening to us rant about aging and gut health. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, join us, watch all the videos, really kind of dive into the importance of gut health. We have an entire video just on diet, which we'll continue to talk about all the time, I'm sure, because it's an extremely important factor. But you can check out our website and see some of our blogs that kind of go into details about what we talked about today. And we also have an ebook. So if you are a physician or a clinician who is interested in understanding more about fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT, the link to the ebook is in the description. And you can always reach out and ask us any questions. And if you have something you wish we would talk about and have not yet, leave a comment and we will add that to our queue of things to talk about next.
Yes. Love the engagement from people. That really helps us drive, the topics that we want to cover. There's just such a dearth of topics that we can cover and that we plan to cover, but your feedback really helps. So thank you all, and see you on the next one.
Have a good day, guys. Thanks.